Anglo-American anthropologist and folklorist Alfred Irving Hallowell spent time living among the Great Lakes Ojibwe people in the mid-20th century. During his time with the Ojibwe, he heard a number of stories that involved rocks engaged in seemingly alive interaction with people and their ancestors. Hallowell grappled with what he was hearing. Did the Ojibwe believe that rocks were alive in some sense? Being the good anthropologist that he was, Hallowell was always trying to discern a principle or a rule from what he was observing, right? Because that's what we do in the Western scientific mindset. You observe things happening and then you try to step back and create an abstraction, a rule or category. Generally speaking, those of us in the Western scientific mindset believe that there must always be broader rules at play. We only need to discover them. We believe in the validity of abstraction and categories, principles. So looking for the concept that could explain what he was hearing about rocks, Hallowell asked an elder if the stories about rocks that intervened in people's affairs meant that the rocks were alive. The elder looked at Hallowell with deep pity. No, of course not, the elder replied. Of course, rocks are not alive. Hallowell felt foolish. He rose to leave. The elder went on. But some are. Theologian Laurel Schneider reports that Hallowell took from this exchange that his own thinking, that the fundamentals of his worldview were clearly not nearly supple enough. I've thought about this story a lot over the years because it so clearly illustrates the limitations of anyone's thinking, how we are rooted, all are rooted in very particular assumptions, particular decisions that have been made about how to think, understand, and feel the world. I've thought about this story a lot because it highlights how challenging it is to encounter real difference. A foundation for our Unitarian Universalist religious tradition, at least as I understand it, is that we believe that difference can be in community together, that we do not need to suppress difference to be in deep relationship with each other. We need not think alike to love alike. Perhaps you have heard these words. They're frequently attributed to 16th century Unitarian Francis David, but they actually came from English Methodist founder Jonathan Wesley. There was actually a painting at my seminary with like an image of Francis David supposedly like giving these words. However, I suspect that when we talk about celebrating diversity, what we are really looking for is difference that is only a few degrees off from ourselves. We want to embrace difference, but not too much difference. We want diversity, but only certain kinds. And of course, we expect to understand the difference, even if we do not agree with it. Difference that we do not understand, difference that is, well, truly different, tends to scare the crap out of us. British writer and psychoanalyst Adam Phillips is quite suspicious of the Western belief that life is a project through which we should strive for more and more accurate knowledge of ourselves and others. He asks, why don't we understand life as an experiment in finding pleasure? Or as an adventure in discovering beauty? Or a project of making meaningful connections with the people we encounter? Why do we in the West so often focus on knowledge? Philosopher Mari Ruti answers concisely, quote, "We seek knowledge about the self as well as about other people because we are trained to associate knowing things with having control over them. We seek knowledge while at the same time ignoring the possibilities for existential wonder that surround us." Of course, rocks are not alive, but some are. In 1964, another Anglo folklorist, Helen Sewell Johnson, spent a few months in Dublin, Ireland, to follow up on a survey that the Irish Folklore Commission had issued 20 years earlier. The survey had asked people in the area about their practices and beliefs around Halloween. What we know as Halloween is descendant from pre-Christian Celtic culture, from the festival of Samhain, the Celtic New Year. The Celts celebrated 4 festivals that were seasonal and connected to their specific context and way of life. Samhain on November 1st, Imbolc on February 1st, Beltane on May 1st, and Lugnasa on August 1st. And of these ancient festivals, the practices and beliefs around Samhain have been adopted and adapted most vigorously and widely. And I suggest if you really want to know more about this, I would encourage you to speak with a church member, Bernadette Burns. She's not here right now, but she is she's ordained leader in a pagan community, or Avenel Tomlinson, who's been an active leader in a pagan community here. And I should warn you that the first time I talked about Samhain from this pulpit, do you remember this, Susan or Sharon? Do you know how Samhain is spelled? Does anyone know how? It's Samhain. So I pronounced it salmon. So as usual, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. So folklorist Helen Sewell Johnson was interviewing people in Dublin about their practices and beliefs around Halloween. She had many discussions with locals about the idea that ghosts walk the earth on Halloween. And one of her interviewees, Joe, would routinely deny the existence of ghosts. He would patiently explain to her that the dead either go to heaven, in which case they wouldn't want to leave to haunt the earth, or the dead went to hell, in which case they were not allowed to leave. So Joe was insistent that ghosts do not haunt the living. After a number of conversations with Joe, Johnson thought to ask about purgatory, that in-between place in some Christian theology that is said to exist between heaven and hell. In response to this question, Joe, quote, slowly raised a finger and looked a bit sideways at me. Lowering his voice, he said, "Ah, them's the ones that comes back." Of course, rocks are not alive, but some are. Halloween, Samhain, is the time of year you may hear that the veil is thin between the worlds of the living and the dead. I was raised in a Unitarian Universalist home that was very humanist and very much centered science as the most trustworthy way of understanding the world. Actually, really the only way. And frankly, much of me still agrees and trusts in those perspectives. Much of me definitely finds comfort in that worldview. So generally, when I have thought about the veil thinning, I have always understood it as purely metaphorical. Of course, there is not an actual veil that is actually thinning. It's a metaphor calling us to remember those who have died. However, I've come to really wonder about some of my fundamental ideas about separateness, about the ways I've understood the concept of boundaries and the ways we are connected and the ways we are separate. I have widened, if for no other reason than I find it far more relaxing to have a humble, gentle, and curious worldview. One that is not so dead set on mastery and understanding. One that appreciates just how much we cannot understand, not just about others, but about ourselves. Like Hollowell, I wonder about the ways that our thinking and believing may not be supple enough to encounter all with which we so desperately need to cope. Of course, ghosts do not visit the living, except for the souls in purgatory. Them's the ones that come back. So as we approach the Celtic New Year this year, I feel the thinness between the worlds in a way I never have. There are many explanations for this. The devastation, violence, brutality, and mass death in Israel, Palestine. It's probably one of them. I was reading about Ben Gurion University, which is located 25 miles from the Gaza border. It's been known for its medical school, its neurology department, and its cutting-edge climate research. The university has prided itself on the close-knittedness of its community and being a meeting point for different views. Many Arab Israelis study here. Last year, the president of the school received violent threats after allowing Arab students to hold a pro-Palestinian rally on campus. When Hamas slaughtered more than 1,300 humans 2 weeks ago, overnight, Ben Gurion University transformed itself into what journalist Jeffrey Gettleman calls a back office for war. Dorms were turned into army barracks. Medical students with almost no clinical experience were drafted into plugging up holes in people's flesh, both the flesh of Israelis and the flesh of Palestinians. Literature majors and computer scientists joined aid operations to box up food, coffee, clothes, and cigarettes to send into the battle zone. University President Daniel Hamovitz initially promised to attend all funerals of university community members who were killed in the October 7th attacks. But when he learned how many funerals that would actually be, he realized he could not keep that promise. Recent reports from Palestinian health officials in Gaza say that the death toll from 2 weeks of Israeli government attacks has topped 4,100 humans, with over 13,000 humans wounded. More than 1,000 Gaza residents remain missing, and many of them are presumed to be under the rubble of collapsed homes. Journalist David Remnick, reporting from Israel, Palestine, after attending many funerals for both Israelis and Palestinians, wrote this week, quote, "After many conversations in recent days with Israelis and Palestinians, after visiting the sites of the October 7th massacre, I find it difficult to convey the overall sense of dread and rage, the intensity of the demands for vengeance. The atmosphere here is, in certain ways, reminiscent of the atmosphere in the United States in the days after 9/11. The urge not just to mourn, to protect, to defend or strike back, but to eradicate, to flatten, to end them is on the most primal level, almost inevitable, but it must be resisted. What will come from answering cruelty with accelerating cruelty, from an endless bombing campaign, from reoccupying part or all of Gaza? One thing is certain: it will intensify the suffering and resentments of ordinary Palestinians. And will it even make Israel more secure? How quickly the boundaries between worlds shift. How quickly we can be invaded. How brutally we strike back. How suddenly the dead make demands on us. It occurs to me to ask, how thick is the veil at other times of year? My guess is it's actually always pretty thin. It's just hard for us to live in the awareness of the veil's thinness. It's just hard for us to live in the awareness of just how quickly and easily death crosses the boundaries we try to set around it. And that death crosses boundaries more easily, more brutally for some of us than others. Here's one thing I can say with certainty. Our thinking and feeling are not nearly supple enough. And another. We are here, this Unitarian Universalist congregation in the middle of the almond orchards, Stanislaus County, to be a sanctuary for that which nurtures suppleness, to be a place of protection from the forces pushing too many into solitary cells of loneliness where we risk far too little. Of course, rocks are not alive, but some are. Blessed be, and amen.